From growing up in Jersey all the way to Hollywood, our guests today are making their dreams come true as they deliver ancient stories drawn from their cultural roots with the entire world. They are the writers behind movies such as Immortals and Death Note, and now they're here to play Fast Five Questions. We have with us Charlie and Vlas Parlapanides, the writers and executive producers of the latest American anime from Netflix, Blood of Zeus. Thank you guys for joining us. We've got Charles and Vlas Parlapanides. Whoop, I said Charles. I should have gone with Charlie. Look at that. See, there you go. Messed it up.
No, that sounded good.
All righty. So thank you guys again for joining us. First question. Which of the Greek pantheon of gods best describes either of you? And in this case, I'm going to want each of you to tell us who would Charlie say reminds him of Vlas, or who would Vlas say reminds him of Charlie?
Well, I was going to say, for myself, I was going to say Hermes because, Hermes was a knucklehead initially, and he was, always kind of getting in trouble, and he was stealing Apollo's cows. But the thing that he always wanted was to be elevated to the status of his other siblings and to be elevated to the pantheon. And basically, Zeus had to tell him, like, hey, get your act together. And so in our story, we only see the Hermes that is now kind of the dutiful son and doing what Zeus asks of him. But I know I always wanted to hang out with Vlas and our other brother. We have another brother who in between us and was maybe a little bit of an idiot. Thankfully, we had very patient parents and loving parents who were, willing to guide us. But if I had to pick one for Vlas, I would say he's Apollo in the sense that all the girls I grew up with are like, oh my God, your brother's so good looking. We love him. Like when he would come home from college. But also Vlas is very wise. Apollo would bring prophecy to mortals. And the temple of Delphi is in the temple of Apollo, or the Oracle of Delphi is in the temple of Apollo. And Vlas is like our mother. Our mother is very wise. She's a very pious woman. But sometimes they'll say something, you're like, oh, wow, like kind of takes you aback and it then comes to fruition, down the line. So for the looks and the prophecy, I would say Vlas is Apollo, not the blonde hair. And we're all pretty, relatively, dark hair and dark features, but that's who I would say for Vlas.
All dark and handsome. So we're going. All right.
I'll take it. I'd say for Charlie, it's an amalgamation again, and it might seem a little weird, but I'll tell you why. Zeus and Athena. Athena by far was the smartest of all the gods, and Charlie by far is one of the smartest people I've ever met. So I think that he has that intelligence. Like we'll go through a script and then he'll see the ripple effect, 10 steps down, and it just always takes me a lot longer to get there. So I'm like, can we do this? Can we not do this? And sometimes I know it's frustrating for him because he gets to see it so much sooner than I do. So there's the intelligence component to it, and Zeus just being someone who he's someone that is a natural born leader. I would say. I think that he could have gone into any field. He obviously went to law school. He was, at the top of his class. He got into some of the best law schools in the country. So I feel like he could have succeeded in law. He could have been like a CEO of a company, and he obviously is succeeding in this. So he's just a natural born leader. He was the captain of the football team, among other things. And so I would say for those two reasons, for myself, I would say I wouldn't, say I'm like this god, but I would draw a characteristic of the god, and that's the anger component that Zeus has, that Hera has, that even Heron has. And sometimes I struggle with my anger, and I have to be careful that I don't let it make me bitter. I don't let it consume me. Seraphim too. And thematically, that was something that we wanted to explore with three characters. The anger that Heron has, he's able to let go, and then he's able to overcome the adversity he's pitted against. The anger that Seraphim has, he's not able to let go, and that becomes his downfall. The anger that Hera has, I would say it pushes her to go too far, but then it changes her in a way, in a way she's forever changed. Right. So, these aren't fast as you questions. Fast questions, long answers.
You're drawing me in. Like, I got to tell you, like, I'm listening and I go, wow, this is really good. Will we see the African gods of Kofi the Gladiator referenced or appear on the show?
Love that.
It's a great question. We would love, I mean, we think that, we would love to help, someone bring that world to life. We've always believed and we've always pitched from the outset that there's so many great world mythologies. We don't, and I think people want to embrace them. They want to see these stories. And so, Kofi was a character that we inserted into the story because in doing our research, it was based on a true character who was basically from North Africa. He was a slave in a silver mine in Athens, and he eventually won his freedom in an athletic competition and became a citizen of Athens. And we thought that was cool. There was a lot of commerce, and even if you know anything about Egyptian deities, North Africa and Greece, there was a lot of interchange between the two. And so exactly, Jay. And so we thought it'd be cool to involve that. The story we hope to tell is primarily focused on the Greek gods, but we think it'd be cool. We had initially pitched when the show was called Gods and Heroes, like we do Gods and Heroes Norse mythology, Gods and Heroes Greek mythology, Gods and Heroes, Celtic mythology, African mythology. They do it all. Now, whether that'll ever come to be, who knows? That's a Netflix question. But we've told them, and I think they're open to the idea. And it's always about finding the right way into those worlds.
We just need to make some fuss, right? Kick up some fuss on social media or something. We want to come play at this party. But hey, great answer. Thank you so much.
So true. The greatest challenge in all this is it's an ensemble show. And so then we said, okay, we're brothers. Okay, so then we said we want it to be about the brothers. And then it's like, okay, well then who else? Oh, the father, Zeus. Okay, and then Hera. And so once you make primarily it's these four characters for that reason. It just started with that idea. And then the great challenge was that we want to spend more time with Kofi. We want to spend more time with some of the Greek goddesses. We want to spend more time with Lexia. And we had her backstory in and more of Kofi's backstory in. But you have 22 pages and 20 to 22 pages. And that was and we couldn't fit it all in. And it broke our hearts because we wanted to get more of those backstories and explore and delve into those characters even more. And at the end of the day, we just didn't have the time, or the real estate. And that was probably the thing that was, I think, most difficult and most challenging.
Who was your favorite Blood of Zeus character to write for, and why?
That's a tough question because we love all the characters. And I would say the characters are an amalgamation of who we are as people. But I think for me, it really stems back to drawing upon experiences. And we are children of immigrants. And consequently, that played a big role in the characters that we wrote. We firsthand have experienced discrimination. Our great-grandfathers were killed and tortured by the Turks simply because they were Greeks. Our grandmother had to hide in a basement to avoid getting raped. So when they came here to the United States, they were living in Asia Minor at that time, which is modern day Turkey now. They encountered all kinds of adversity. And so I feel that, at times too, we experienced it to a certain extent, much less than what they experienced it, where we would bring in the spanakopita to our lunchroom and people would kind of smell and look at us kind of funny and think that we were weird. And so when it came time to write our main character, Heron, we wanted to write a character who was an outsider, and he's the quintessential outsider, and he's ostracized and he's minimized. And so what I would say is that experience gave us great empathy with regards to any ethnic group that is in any way subjugated. We have great empathy for those types of groups simply because of what happened to our great-grandparents, our grandparents, and some of what we experienced here in the US.
Yeah, and what I would add, what Vlas is referring to, is that our family, both sides, are originally from Smyrna, which is now called Izmir. And basically, Greeks have been living there since before the time of Alexander the Great, for over 2,500 years. And when the Turks rolled through and they burned Smyrna, there were more ethnic Greeks living in Smyrna than there were in Athens. And both of our grandmothers had to, flee for their lives, and they told us the stories. And our grandmother's father, he and 3 of his sons helped organize the men to try and fight off the Turkish army so the women and children could get to the boats. And because he was a ringleader, when they finally caught him, they hung him and his sons from a tree in front of their old house. And so that's a story that is kind of lost here in the West. We don't hear about it. The Armenians have always brought up because, in the early 1920s, the Turks rolled through, they killed over 2.5 million Armenians. They took out about 500,000 Greeks. But that's what BoZ is referencing to. And those were all the stories that, we always heard growing up. The one thing I will say, though, getting back to Blood of Zeus, is that I think Seraphim was the most fun, because we just thought that it was just such an interesting character. We always, we told Sean, our director, from the beginning, he's not a villain, he's an antagonist. And we hope the audience will empathize with him. We know he kills a lot of people and he does a lot of brutal things, but we love Seraphim, and we hope audiences do too. And we hope you guys did. But that for me was always fun whenever we got to, do a Seraphim scene or a Seraphim and Hera. That was always fun. We always loved the dynamic between them. But it's always hard to pick a favorite. But if you put a gun to my head, that would be it. Seraphim would be it.
And he's the audience's favorite. Everything that we've heard, the audiences love him.
I see Wally.
I was about to say, see, Wale is going crazy over there. Like, just shake. No, everybody admits it. Seraphim was our gateway person. We all identify with his trauma and his issues. And yeah, for real.
Yeah, I told my brother, he's the main character. He is the main character.
Very astute. You'll see why. Very astute.
Who is your favorite god from the Greek pantheon, and who is your favorite god from a non-Greek pantheon?
It's a good one. For the Greek pantheon, it's so hard to choose because, again, there's certain components, and I don't feel like I'm dodging the question, but I love the leadership skills of Zeus. But I love what Charlie mentioned for Hermes, someone that was trying to grow into himself and just really discover who he was. Ares for me is a little less interesting, but there's the fact that Athena was very wise. I love what Charlie had mentioned about Apollo. And well, who would you say, bro, for the Greek gods?
For me, I always loved Zeus, and I don't know if that's because when we were young, we saw Clash of the Titans and Laurence Olivier was playing Zeus, but I always loved the story that when Typhon attacked Olympus, like all the other gods bailed, they left, and only Zeus stayed and fought. And I always just that always struck me as just being such a cool story. And if you've ever seen the vase of that, Typhon's this half serpent, half human thing, and there's Zeus with the lightning bolts. And just as a young kid, that just left an indelible mark on me. So for me, I know Zeus sometimes was also a terrible guy, but we certainly have a lot of love for him. Listen, there's a lot of tragedy and a lot of brutality in Greek mythology. If you really dig into the stories, and so, but for me, it's Zeus. And then for the non-pantheon, I would have to go with Loki, just because there was a story that we love about how Loki's imprisonment, and how his wife helps him escape this imprisonment, brings about Ragnarok, basically the end of days in Norse mythology. And if you know that story, it's a really cool story. And then obviously the MCU, they just made him this huge character, and Tom Hiddleston's amazing. But that story we always felt could be an amazing story to tell out of that mythology.
And I would say in that same mythology, because it would be Odin for me, but the reason why is that, and for this reason, is that he felt responsible for his people. He felt that he needed to do and make whatever self-sacrifice he had to make for the betterment of his people. He knew doom was coming. He knew that they were going to be in peril. And the fact that he took on that responsibility, took on that burden, was something that I always really loved about that character. And we're just family guys. We're blue collar guys. Family is very important to us. Faith and family, those things matter the most. We both love being dads. And so that component for Odin, and for that reason, I would choose him, though I think Loki is probably more fun to write.
So, hey, Charlie, thanks for bringing that up, talking about the MCU, by the way. So our last question is the MCU Odin versus Blood of Zeus. They're both dead right now in the shows, or dead. But who would win in the fight? If those two went head to head, who would win?
It's a very interesting question. Obviously I'm very biased. I love Zeus. and we're being Greek. But the one thing I will say that Odin was truly kind of like, I guess the young kids would call him like the OG god, in the sense that like in Greek mythology, you had the primordial gods that were overthrown by the Titans, and then the Olympians overthrew the Titans. And you always kind of have these stories of how one regime is usurped by the other.
Right.
But with Odin, he was just kind of the all-father, and that was it. And like Greek mythology doesn't have an end of time story. Kind of Christianity then kind of just made it kind of disappear. There's no twilight of the gods. Right. But Odin is there all the way to the end. And so just out of respect for the fact that he reigned through all of their mythology, you know, pretty much, I give him the just slight nod over Zeus. Slight nod.
Just the edge. All right, cool.
Yeah. That question made me laugh. When I read that, I literally laughed out loud. I'm like, oh, that's funny. That's really witty. I would argue that Zeus would come out on top of that. Listen, the lightning at its peak, that heat, it's 5 times the surface of the temperature of the sun. So that dude with the lightning, he takes down Odin. And because people don't know this little known fact, Zeus is actually from New Jersey, and he invented
That's it. He wins.
New Jersey rules. Okay.
Great question, though. I loved it. It made me laugh.
Thanks. Great answers, guys. Thank you so much. And I will say this much. Looking forward to seeing Blood of Zeus season 2 when it comes out.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the fan, for being big fans and supporters.
And thank you for shining a light on Ade. He is so talented. Great. People have no idea. Like when he was in the booth, we were just like, we got to figure out, like, we got to get more stuff. He's so good.
Because he was so good. We're like, oh my God. We love Castlevania. And I personally think he's the best thing in Castlevania. But he is so talented. He's someone that we want to work with, not only on this, but God willing, in other shows too.